Hey everybody, it's Sean Gibbons from the Communications Network. Hope you're doing well on this Thursday afternoon. Your computer's not broken. You're hearing a little music. That's just me. Oops, was me. See if I can make that work. No, it's John Prine actually. He's stopping and starting here. Well, we lost Mr. Prine the other day to complications from COVID-19. So Kerry, Doug, and Eric and I and Tristan thought we'd play a little something for you. This song is called That's the Way the World Goes Round. Find it on iTunes or Spotify or whatever your favorite streaming service is. Give it a quick listen. But we'll just play that while everybody's entering the room. And we've got a number of folks coming in right now. So I'm just going to keep yakking at you while we let the room fill up a little bit. And in the meantime, maybe we could all do this. If you would go down, use your finger or your cursor, whatever you got. And if you should see, turn Mr. Prime down a little bit, you should see a little thing down here that says chat, little thought bubble. Pretty evident what that is. That's the chat function. If you would open that up, and then you should see something that says to, you want to make sure it says to all panelists and attendees so you can talk to one another. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and type in there. Hi, it's Sean. Let's see if I can type. Add your name, please, if you would. Yeah, your organization and where you're coming in from. Hey, Nick, how are you? In Idaho. All right. Hey, Sarah Grace. Nicole from Stanford, Sean up in Boston, if I can remember. Mandy, how are you, my friend? Sharon, who else? Jeremiah, Laura, Beth, Mark. I always try to do this. Y'all start going too fast. Louise, Carol, Hunt, Annie, Bruce, Zakia, Brenda, Catherine. Okay, keep coming. Welcome to all of you. Happy to see you. Hoping everybody in your orbit, your families, your colleagues, your friends, and all that, everybody's healthy and well. You know, a lot of folks like Mr. Prine, unfortunately, are not, and with more to come in the days to come. Raymond coming in from Kenya. Oh, wow. What time is it there, Raymond? If you let me know. That's, yeah, I think you're up late. Marissa, how are you? Julia coming in from LA. How are you, my friend? Adia from Candid in Oakland. Good friends up there. Hope you all are staying safe. Stacy and Robin, how are you? All right, so keep, you can chit chat with one another over the course of this little hour that we're together. Please go ahead. If you're seeing stuff you think is interesting that might be of value to other folks, toss it in there. If you can throw in a link or if you have a question, you can always talk to one another. That's a piece of it. Deborah in Indy, how are you, Deborah? I thought you said, at first I saw Lumen, I thought Indley, but no, it's Indy. Anyway, welcome everybody. We've got Doug Hattaway and Carrie Schum and Eric Zimmermann with us. We're going to get to that in just a quick minute. A couple things I just want to flag for you before we get underway. My colleague Tristan Mahabir is running the deck, so I'm going to ask him to advance the slide in a minute. Our colleague Carrie Klein is taking notes on all of this, and so you will see notes from this as well as a live recording or a recording of this session available up on comnetwork.org and on YouTube in the not too distant future. And then our colleague Gab Sarah Ferris, as she always does, is manning Twitter. So if you're one of those people who can manage two screens, God bless you. We're on Twitter as well, taking live notes. The hashtag there to find it and to share is ComNetLive, COMNETLIVE. And then across the next couple of days or weeks, we've been gathering under the hashtag Comms for Good. That's COMMS, the number 4, GOOD. Go there, you can find one another, share resources. All right, the background music is distracting, Rachel. All right, now everybody's a music fan. I got you. I'm going to turn off Mr. Prine because I think the song's over. But Tristan, if you would go to the next slide, please. This is something I hope many of you have availed yourselves of. If not, please do. In fact, this is something that Doug and the team helped us with over the last couple of days. Maybe you've seen this earlier. We've updated it and improved it thanks to the help from Doug, as well as some folks from GW University, Defy Communications. Who else helped us? Jay Sherman Studio and the good folks at Spitfire. This is called what we've been calling the COVID-19 Crisis Triage Kit. Crisis Communications Triage Kit. As you can see, it's open source and available. It's got a lot of good information and sort of just adjacent to it, we've got a Google Sheet that's got examples of work that people have done in the field. So, and there's no rules here, folks. It's not plagiarism. If you go in there right now, kind of the rule is you put something in, fully expect one of your colleagues to borrow it because we're all working really, really fast and trying to be as efficient as we can. So thanks to everybody for being so generous. And you can find, if you need the link to this, you can find this at comnetwork.org. There's actually a thing on the homepage that says Triage Kit. Click on that, it'll get you right in there. All right, Mr. T and Kerry has posted up in the chat as well, because she's awesome. Circles. You've heard us talking about this if you've been a fan of the network or been part of the network for a while. This is something that we were planning to roll out a little bit later this year. Because of the moment we're in, we're going to be moving it up a little bit more more swiftly. So sometime in the next couple of weeks, is just a heads up. Circles are coming, and they're coming soon. They're not going to be perfect because we're going to try to make them really fast. But the idea in principle is this: they're going to be sort of communities of practice or brain trusts built around the issues that you're working on or the role that you play inside of your organization. So I believe we're going to start with social justice and health policy as the two issues to connect people there, because we think there's some urgency around those. And then for the roles, I believe we're going to do sort of a manager's role. And I am blanking on what the second one is, but suffice to say, stay tuned on your inbox. There's more information to come there. The idea is we'll connect you so that folks working in health policy, for instance, are talking to other folks in health policy. You can share ideas, research information. We can all move a little bit faster when we're talking to the exact right people. All right, Mr. T, if you'll take it forward for us. This is the other thing I want to flag for you. IDEO, the folks at IDEO, the design firm out in the Bay Area, have done an incredibly kind and generous thing. They reached out to us now, gosh, a little over a week ago, I believe, with a really kind offer, which was many folks working in the nonprofit space or in community foundations are trying to help get the word out about COVID-19, to point to CDC or Dr. Anthony Fauci at NIH or your local health departments, local governments. Some of you may need a little bit of design help to do that. And so IDEO has agreed to try to connect you with creatives around the country who want to try to give back and would love to partner with you. So it's a free offer. If you go to Open IDEO's website, or if you go to the network's website, or I'm guessing Kerry is shortly going to put this in the chat, there is a link that you can go to request help from IDEO. They'll be as happy as hell if they get 5 people asking, to be even happier if they got 10,000 of us asking. But by all means, don't feel shy. Go ahead and take advantage there. And yes, Nicole, Circles for Oceans is coming, absolutely, but maybe just not yet, but within the next month or 2 or 3, whatever it's going to be. And thank you, Kerry. There you go, ideo.in/signal boost. Mr. T, if you will take it forward to the next slide. This is the other thing I wanted to flag for you. We're really proud and honored and happy to be able to join. There's, I think, over 130, 140 organizations now from within the social sector who've signed on. This is a letter coming out from APIP, if you're familiar with them. It's Asian American and Pacific Islanders in Philanthropy, who put out a note. It was published today in the Chronicle of Philanthropy, or it was a piece referencing this open letter in the Chronicle of Philanthropy today, talking about the rise in horrible xenophobic, racist acts, particularly directed at folks from the Asian American community here in the United States. Perhaps that's happening around the globe, but we know it's happening here at home. It's disgusting, it's wrong, and we've signed on to say that that's a problem. There's things that we can maybe be doing in the social sector to help mitigate that. So if you could, go ahead and take a quick look at that, but happy to join them in solidarity on that issue. Mr. T, if you'll go forward. And now it's my turn to hand it over to Doug and the team from Hattaway Communications. Incredibly grateful to them. My guess is you tuned into this because you saw the thing, which is Doug read the whole darn CDC Crisis Communications Manual, pulled out some stuff, found there were a few things wanting, and it's going to offer some recommendations and adaptations to make it really relevant for you for this moment. So over the next hour, we're all going to get to hear what he's learned, and grateful to him and the team, Kerry and Eric. Why don't I sign off for now, and I'll see you all on the other side. I'll be taking your questions along the way. Oh, that's the last thing I got to tell you. If you have questions, you're going to put them in the Q&A box, which my guess is, again, just use your finger or your cursor or whatever down there at the bottom next to the chat box. It's pretty self-evident. It says Q&A. That's where we're going to put questions, and you can vote for each other's questions too, so we make sure we get to the ones that are most relevant and salient for the most folks. All right, so with that, Doug, if you would, take it away.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. I really appreciate you taking the time, particularly those of you who work for organizations on the front lines of this pandemic. We really appreciate everything you and your colleagues are doing. I saw a number of my friends from Texas Health Resources signing on. Welcome to everybody. We're here to share science-based insights and ideas that you can use to help promote public health, whether or not you work for a public health organization. And we see this presentation as inspiration, really. There's a lot of things that you can do, whether you are on the front lines or at a nonprofit or foundation and work on other issues. And God knows there's a lot of things that need to be done to address the health and economic impacts of the pandemic. So we're here to share insights and inspiration and to hear your ideas, which we're going to ask for as well. Tristan, let's go to the next screen there. Just to say a little bit about us, for those who aren't familiar with Hattaway Communications, we're based in Washington, D.C. Our mission is to help visionary leaders and organizations use strategy, science, and storytelling to achieve ambitious goals for people on the planet. As you can see in that first column, we've worked with health organizations of all kinds in education and public health and healthcare, hospitals, foundations that are focused on health, but we work on a lot of issues too. But no matter what it is, our clients are looking to improve people's lives and want to use the power of strategy, science, and story to do that. Let's go to the next slide. I'll have Eric and Kerry introduce themselves.
Sure.
Eric, you want to go first?
I'm
Sure.
Carrie. Sorry, we're tripping over each other a little bit. I'm Carrie Schum. I'm the EVP here at Hattaway. I've worked on a lot of public health issues, including infectious disease and things related to infectious disease like risk management and vaccine hesitancy. I've also worked on a lot of broad scale issues that affect large swaths of the population, from healthy eating and physical activity to risk screening and things like HIV testing. So a lot of that has played into this presentation that we're going through with you today, particularly the work I've done in tobacco control with the Truth Campaign.
Hey everyone, Eric Zimmermann. I direct narrative research and development for many of our public health and global health clients at Hattaway, including the World Health Organization, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and others. I'm really thankful to ComNet just for pulling this together. One thing that we really try to emphasize through our work is just how central communications is to the goals of public health. Motivating people to change their behaviors is a science, just like developing the models and the interventions themselves. So we're excited to share what we've learned about that, and thankful that so many of you signed on to learn.
Hey everybody, rather than say too much about myself, let's go to the next slide. I'm going to tell you a story about my first public health crisis. It came on October 15th, 2001, when I was the communications director for the Senate Majority Leader in Washington, Tom Daschle. And I was walking to work in the Capitol when I got a call from our chief of staff, who told me an intern in the mailroom had opened a letter laced with anthrax. And by the end of that day, we'd learned that, as it says, nearly 36 staff members had inhaled deadly anthrax spores. And we had to communicate with tens of thousands of people who work for Congress. And our office became the epicenter of a very unique public health crisis, a bioterrorism attack. And I, with no background in public health at all, was thrust in the position of managing communications from the Senate leadership and the sort of top public health officials, including folks from the military who came to help deal with that situation. And I must say, those of us who were there were terrorized. We feared for the lives of our colleagues who had been exposed. We didn't know what was happening to us, but we had work to do. We had tasks to perform. And we were focused on taking purposeful, productive action to deal with this crisis that was right in front of us. And that's something I came to learn later. When you are faced with a crisis like this, you are focused on survival and taking action. Now, in this case, there were millions of people who watched this unfold through the media, and it came on the heels of anthrax attacks on news media in New York and Florida, and the media called it a national panic. And later I heard about a man in rural Connecticut who had been caught up in this panic and wrapped his house in plastic, even though he lived out in the middle of, rural Connecticut. And what I came to learn later was that millions of people who followed that story felt vulnerable, but they didn't have a productive course of action to take. And I recently learned that this is called negative vicarious rehearsal. It's a psychological response in which people who see media coverage of a faraway crisis mentally rehearse it as though it's happening to them. And who knows what they'll do in response. This one's different. In fact, everybody is implicated and involved in this. So it's a different type of experience. And what we're going to do is talk about promoting productive action, because as we'll see, not everybody does that. And that's something that we need to do. So that's what this whole webinar is really focused on and dedicated to, giving you insights from science, ideas from what others are doing to promote productive action. Let's go to the next slide. As Sean mentioned, let me look at that. That's our agenda. So I'm going to go through some of the science and start out there with science-based tips for communicating in a crisis. When that happened to me back in the early 2000s, it wasn't until afterward I learned that the CDC had a whole set of guidelines and science-based tips for communicating. So as soon as this came up, I was like, I got to go see what they have and share it with people. That's kind of why we're here. Kerry's going to talk about ideas for promoting productive action and persuading reluctant people to take action. And Eric is going to talk about some of the positive sides of this and what we call aspirational communication and how you can use it in public health. Next slide. So this is the CDC guide, and this manual was created for communicators. It was geared at people who work at government agencies, but it offers insights and ideas that anyone can use for effective communication. And all of you work for trusted institutions in our society, and all of the individuals who are part of or reached by your organization do have a role they can play in helping to spread useful messages, counter harmful ones, and encourage beneficial behaviors. And as Eric said, doing it right, effective communication is absolutely critical to public health. So we're gonna share a selection from this very exhaustive resource, and it is linked in the triage kit that ComNet created. And a number of the materials we're gonna reference, you can go right there and look at the source. So I'll preface what we're going to show you is by saying this presentation is not meant to be exhaustive. What I went through the 400 something pages looking for insights related to promoting action, but there's a lot more in there that you can learn. But what we're going to share is based on expert experience from crisis communications and public health, as well as communication science, which we use in our work. Let's go to the next slide. So this says what our mission is. Effective communication during a crisis is not an attempt at mass mental therapy or a magic potion that fixes all problems. To reduce the psychological impact of a crisis, the public should feel empowered to take actions that will reduce their risk of harm. So it's about reducing psychological impact, but it is also about stopping this pandemic. Notice that the CDC says people should feel empowered. And psychologists would call that self-efficacy, which has been studied extensively in the area of public health and promoting healthy behaviors. It's a sense that we feel that we are actually capable of doing something about our situation. And without that, people can feel hopeless and powerless. And the more empowered we feel, the more likely we are to act. So a lot of the tips we're going to talk about today will help you communicate in ways that do that. And I'll reference those as we go along. But a lot of this is about that, people feeling, yes, I can do something. Next slide. Here are some of the realities that we're up against. I think there's one or two more bullets on there, Tristan. So stopping the spread of the virus remains a challenge. It's not going to go away. I can imagine it's going to get even harder as people are feeling the stress of social isolation. You can promote productive action without good information and guidance. Some people will take counterproductive actions. Like the guy who wrapped his house in plastic in Connecticut wasn't hurting anybody else. What we have going on now can be harmful to other people. There's misinformation, meaning incorrect information, but also disinformation, intentionally confusing and misleading people is going on. And that actually makes matters worse, of course. Some people, as Kerry's going to talk about, actually resist expert advice and do the opposite of what is recommended. So there's a lot to do. You can help no matter what kind of information, what kind of organization you work for, by sharing information, encouraging action, and offering hope. And as ComNet has put it, lend your audience to the effort. Let's go to the next slide. So we're going to start with some science. This is directly from the manual. There's a lot in there. I've pulled a few out, like I said, related to motivation. For someone to move to action, they must see a personal benefit to taking the action and believe the action can be accomplished. So it might sound obvious, but it's important to be explicit about the personal benefit of taking action. People have to see themselves in the message. The CDC's website, for example, when you go to a page Kerry's going to show you, it says how to protect yourself and others. Again, that sounds sort of obvious, but the beginning of motivation is people see themselves in the message. That one's very explicit, obviously. Oh, how to protect myself. There's other ways that comes through too that we're going to talk about. But there are communications about this pandemic that go out with a focus on people considered most at risk. And if you start there and your communication focus is there first, a lot of people aren't necessarily going to see themselves in that if they're not elderly or have an underlying health condition. So that's an example. If you're like putting out information that's focused, that's framing it around people most at risk, understand that a lot of other people won't necessarily see themselves in that. We know that they are part of it because they have a role to play in stopping the spread to people who are at risk. But this is one of just the realities of the situation we have to keep in mind. Everyone needs to take action to stop this pandemic. So believing the action can be accomplished is a reference to self-efficacy. And people will act if they understand the action and see it as something they can do. If you throw too many actions at them, too much to do, or if you make simple things sound complicated, you demotivate people. If you confuse them, you lose them. So messages should be intuitive, meaning it works with your intuitive system, meaning you instantly understand them. That's something we go for in all of our work. Eric led a project that we had with the World Health Organization a number of years ago, where they saw that the use of jargon, public health jargon in communications, was actually getting in the way of the mission, and asked us to come in and help eradicate jargon from their communications. Let's go to the next slide. Seeing or hearing that others are taking actions can be a powerful social influence. Most people on this webinar are well versed in social influence and using social media. This is an insight from social psychology called social proof. We're more likely to take actions we see others take, literally see others, particularly if they're people we relate to or admire. You know, we jump on the bandwagon, we follow the herd. These are metaphors about social influence. And this is where storytelling comes in. It's beyond just a message and telling somebody to go do something. Share the story, show the examples of people doing it. That's the most powerful way to achieve this kind of effect. Sharing stories and visual examples of people taking the specific action you want them to take. And we call that strategic storytelling. Thinking about what are your objectives in every communication when you're putting a person in the picture, what is it you aim to communicate through that, and be super specific about each and every story you put out. For more on strategic storytelling, you can check out Storytelling for Good. It's on the ComNet website, comnetwork.org. It says Storytelling for Good. And you'll find tools there that can help you map out a storytelling strategy and craft compelling content. My team worked to build this with funding from the Rockefeller Foundation to bring strategy, science, and storytelling and put it at your fingertips. So if you're interested in learning more about how to apply the science and the strategy to storytelling, I recommend you go there, Storytelling for Good. Next slide. The more socially desirable and easily undertaken a recommended action is, the more likely it will be accepted. As Kerry will tell you from her 2 decades of work in this field, people will take actions that are easy, popular, and fun. And making it socially desirable, as it says here, is obviously similar to what we've talked about before, but it's bringing in another dimension to it. Making something socially desirable is best done through the kind of storytelling we just talked about, showing others doing it, and praising people who set the right example. If you're a parent or familiar with developmental psychology about how we develop as human beings, that's called positive reinforcement. So doing positive messaging and reinforcement of action is a good way to go. Framing responsible, productive actions as the right thing to do adds a moral dimension to making something socially desirable. And it doesn't always seem like it, but protecting and caring in the way some people behave, but protecting and caring for others is called a moral foundation, a universal foundation across cultures that people understand it is the right thing to do. It's not rocket science. Reminding people it's the right thing to do is activating that sort of moral intuition, that's called. And they'll most likely have what's called a self-accountability response, also known as feeling a little guilty for not doing what they know they're supposed to do. So tone is important. Being positive, taking a light touch, showing people what to do, positive reinforcement, examples of people doing it is a good way to go. Shaming people sort of in an aggressive way can actually provoke the opposite and raise resistance. So you have to be smart about the way that you promote actions like this in a way that show that everybody's doing it. Let's go to the next slide. We're just going to sort of sum up the science, and give a shout out to Angel Kim, a designer on our team who did these illustrations here. First thing, just a quick sum up. Keep your messages super simple. That's always important. We're looking for intuitive, instant understanding. But when people are under stress, as we are now, it's even harder to process complex ideas or information. If you confuse them, you lose them. So no matter what it is, keep it super simple. Using consistent messages. Again, we know if we're going to achieve retention, people remembering our messages, much less being motivated to act, we have to repeat them a lot. In this context, in a crisis context, people actively seek out information from multiple sources, which is something we don't do every day. You've probably seen yourself doing it, looking for in different places to find out who's saying what. So people are actively doing that. One thing we can do is make sure we are repeating messages from credible public health messengers. So as people go searching, they're seeing consistency. And that's obviously a hard thing to do in this environment when there are so many sources. So the more we are all just sharing messages, not trying to reinvent the wheel, but sharing messages from credible health experts, the better. As we said, state the benefits of taking action, beginning with the individual, as well as their loved ones and their communities. Promoting simple actions, as we said. People need to see that the action is straightforward. And share stories of people taking action. Ultimately, storytelling is the most powerful form of motivation. People are much more likely to take actions they see others taking. So that's a quick and dirty summation of a lot of science and a lot that you as communicators know. So for some, it's just good to be reminded. Kerry's going to go into some more examples of specific types of actions that people are promoting. But before we do that, let's go to the next slide and pause for any questions.
Okay, and we do have one. Carissa Cunningham asks, I'm curious about how to maintain consistency in messaging when the information seems to be changing and evolving day to day. So things like wearing a mask, as a for instance, we heard don't do that. Now we're hearing
totally
we need to do that because this is a novel coronavirus and we're just learning as we go. How do we maintain consistency?
Exactly, it's hard. And it's an evolving situation. So one thing is to be explicit about the fact that we're learning as we go. This is an evolving situation because you can't be consistent about something like that when what you know today is different from what you knew the day before. So I think it's partly what we can do is help back up the public health experts who are trying to be straightforward and upfront. And it's very clear direction in the CDC manual, particularly for messengers, leaders, to be upfront about what you know and what you don't know. That's a good way to help people understand why they might hear something about wearing masks, one day and then later hear something different. So you're going to have to live with a level of inconsistency as this thing evolves. And that's part of, I think, what we can do is, again, continue to go back to the public health experts that you support and recognize as credible experts, help them share what they're saying and validate it as information evolves. And then as we get clarity, again, it's about repeating clear, simple messages.
Next question comes from our friend Sandra, who I believe is down in Brazil. Sandra asks, how can you keep a positive mood in your messaging when the news that we're hearing is so hard and difficult everywhere on the planet? Can you talk a little bit more about that? So we're hearing just these awful, awful bits of news, whether it's coming from Europe or earlier from China, now here in the United States. How do we maintain a positive tone in that moment?
Yep. Eric's actually going to talk about that. There are insights with a crisis. There's also, it's not all negative. There are positive feelings and things, dynamics that come out of it. a short answer, because I see some other questions, also want to move to Kerry's section. I see someone who's putting a question, say they live in one of the reddest states where people don't like to be told what to do. Kerry's going to bring in some ideas there around persuading the reluctant. But a couple rules apply to all of that, and starting with positive. That's about being solutions oriented. So when everybody's being bombarded every day by the problem, where you add value is lean into solutions. That's really what we're talking about here. So where you're saying, here's a positive action you can take. Here's an example of somebody taking that action. That's positive reinforcement. That makes people feel good. Look, there are things I can do. That does make people feel better. Seeing others doing things to help others. Just the stories of the folks, the medical community on the front lines, all the generosity that's coming out through all this. Sharing those makes people feel good. It's emphasizing positive, but it is also reinforcing actions people can take. It's not just about making people feel good. So if you're doing that, you're actually accomplishing a lot. Let's move on to just one quick question, then we'll move on to Carrie's. It says, do you think it's preferable to have regular communications email every Tuesday, for example, to release essential information as you have it? I think that is a case-by-case basis. If it's an action people need to take that they didn't know about, go ahead and get it out there. Updating people, like one thing that we saw is that a lot of people were seeing their employers, certainly people feel their employers are responsible sources of information, are seeing their employers as go-to sources of information. So having some consistent communication about what's going on is a good idea. I'll turn it over to Kerry now to go on with the next section.
Yeah, and I think this is the critical thing. You know, one of the things that anyone who works in public health knows is we often start by saying your audience is not the general public. This is the odd case where our audience actually is everybody in the general public, and everybody needs to do at least one thing and often more than one thing. And so that is why this kind of work and this kind of discussion is so important, because it takes organizations like all of you here to reach that scale. To reach everybody in America, we need all the great communicators in America to be out there with those consistent, clear, simple, and repeated messages. And so that's what we're here to talk about, is what could those be? You know, there are certainly the public health messages that you're hearing from the CDC and from the coronavirus task force, but there are other things too. And I think that's where your knowledge of the people in your communities can really be helpful. Especially, I know someone put the note about the red states, many of whom are not experiencing the level of disease that you're seeing in places like California and New York. So their perception of the risk is less, their perception of the threat is less, and yet they still need to be encouraged to do the same things. So how do you reach them? Look at some different channels and look at some different tweaks on the messaging that bring it personal to them and make them more relevant for the state that you're in. So we wanted to talk about, you know, the other thing too is none of us are in this alone. You know, there's lots of people out there with interesting creative ideas and opportunities. We're going to put forth a few to share and say, you can find more than this, and simply repeating and broadening the reach for some of these is what's going to do some good. So if we can go to the next slide. And you can go through the builds on this. You know, people have, the opportunity here is that while the audience is vast, the engagement is real. We've got millions of people anxious to do something, anxious about their own situation, and with a real interest in taking actions that benefits themselves. Certainly, we are all at some point driven by enlightened self-interest, but also their loved ones, their families, their communities, and the broader society. And so that's where the more that we can get people really thinking that way of how do we mobilize the people around us to meet the need that we see in our community, and share it and document it and duplicate it to create that powerful scale and resonance that it's really going to take to get this to sink into people. So if you can go to the next slide. You know, this is the most basic level, the most straightforward level. This is from the CDC, and as Doug mentioned earlier, This is their core fact sheet that's on their website. We have the URL on here, and it does take several of those lessons that we've talked about. Here's what to do to protect yourself and others. So right there, there's the self-interest and the more enlightened self-interest, helping those people around you. And very simple, clear instructions about what to do. Cover your hands and mouth, cover your coughs. This is the public health message that still needs to be repeated. As we see, there are people going out, there are people not wearing masks in public, which is probably a little more understandable given that that is fairly recent change. But the more you can be repeating it and referring people back to these things so they can read it for themselves. The more people engage with the information, the more they're going to internalize and have the skills and that self-efficacy to act on it and to believe it and to share it with other people. So obviously the CDC is a great place to refer people to, but there are a lot of others. So let's go to the next slide, please. We're all concerned and worried about the people on the front lines, our healthcare providers who are helping the people who are the sickest among us, and hearing these stories of the lack of equipment for them. You can take action on that too. And that's another really positive, powerful action. This is a site called GetMe PPE, which is run by frontline medical providers. And there's 4 really clear actions. So again, simple, clear, and immediately gratifying of request it if you are a healthcare provider who needs it, give it, make it if you can make it for people who are busily getting their sewing machines out of storage and making things for people in their community, and then donate money. So depending on your skills and your engagement in the issue, this is one place where you can do a number of things to actually reach people on the front lines. If you can go to the next slide. Another thing that is really affecting all of us, as you see us all broadcasting from our various home offices, people are home and many of them are isolated and many of them are wrestling with taking care of their families and children during these periods of isolation. This is a really great activity started by Sue Bird, who is the Olympic gold medalist in basketball, WNBA star, who teamed up with this app to start challenges. So you can challenge WNBA players, famous NBA stars, and be part of this interesting new community. You see that you're not alone, and also get people engaging in the things that make them feel like life is a little bit more normal. Getting your child to play basketball and do some of these tricks and skills with these famous players is a great activity, makes you feel less alone, makes you feel part of a new community, and for parents and others who are wrestling with what to do with their children, gives them things to do. So it helps cope with that on a whole bunch of different levels. And there are other things like this. Nike is doing some great stuff. FIFA, the Soccer Association, is doing things like this. So you can find and share things like this that really give people things to do at home that make them feel a little bit more normal, and like that positive feeling of things are going to get back to normal. At least I can still do this. If we go to the next slide, one of the real stressors and challenges in this particular day we find ourselves is it's a health crisis and it's an economic crisis for millions of us. And so there are people and ways to take action on that side of it too. This is an Instagram page that was set up by Instagram influencers where they are sharing the small businesses in their communities. And so it's aggregating it, making it easy to find lots of small businesses around the country and around the world and contribute to them. You can buy gift cards, you can buy their products, you can show support for them. So again, it's a way to take an action while doing something that many people are doing, which is browsing on social media and sharing their thoughts on social media, but also help people out who are struggling financially and supporting small businesses. And of course, if you go to the next slide, this is really simple and low tech, but this is a virtual tip jar, which is just a Google Sheet. And it has the names and the locations of restaurants and individual servers and bartenders who work there so that you can find them and you can give them money through Venmo or other apps. So if you've got a favorite place that you wish you could go to, you can do sort of a second best thing, which is supporting the people that make that such a special place. And again, this is the DC one, we're in DC, but these are started in many communities. And there's, again, something you could do if there isn't one in your community. This would be an easy thing to model and replicate and really help out people in your local community. And I think that's really the thing here is we've got so many tools and techniques, all of us, whether we are public health people or just concerned citizens and individuals who know communications really well. There's a lot of different ways you can do it, and simply taking those actions is really helpful right now because people are looking for information and they're looking for things to do. If we can go, there are a lot of questions, so yeah. We're interested in hearing from you, what are you seeing? What ideas do you have to share? And certainly go to the Q&A as well.
All right, so why don't we start with our friend Catherine, who's coming in from Seattle, and we're obviously very mindful of the situation out there and sending our hearts and thoughts and all that good stuff out to the folks in Seattle. Catherine asks, do you think the war metaphor is useful? We've been hearing a lot about that, particularly from some of our political leaders, but there's been this idea that we're in a wartime footing. Is that useful, or psychologically, is it effective as a communications tool?
There are pros and cons. The good thing is people understand it, and it is simple, and you can get a sense of there's a good side and a not so good side. The question, though, I think, and it goes to what we're saying earlier, where, what do you do when the information changes all the time, is war metaphors assume one side and another side. When they're shifting and unclear information around what to do or where the battle really is, that's where it becomes less useful. So I think so that may be an overarching one, but then for individual people, are you fighting a war or are you supporting the home troops, the home front? And what can you do there? So I think, metaphors are great because we all understand them, but they can sort of turn people off. And I think that after this section, we do talk about that. There are people who think this is overblown, particularly in those states where they're not seeing it yet. Why do I have to stay home in North Dakota where we have, very few cases and we're all falling apart anyway? It's a harder message to get across. And there might be some other things to do there, which are more about being part of a solution.
Christian asks, how can you counter misinformation or misleading information in a community? In particular, misinformation that's being disseminated from respected experts or influencers have a lot of credibility that is more difficult to challenge.
Yeah, I think that is a really hard thing right now. We're in a world where people are more distrustful of institutions and scientific expertise than we have traditionally been in the past. And there are people in those very trustworthy positions who are saying things that are not always that useful. And I think the two keys are, don't get caught up in refuting, just be out there proactively with the right stuff, because then it becomes a conflict. And we don't have time for conflict. We need to get people the right message, get the volume up on the right thing. So focus on being more proactive and getting the good, accurate information out rather than refuting the misinformation is the way to go on that one.
Let me just offer my own follow-up question to that, which is, there is such a low level of trust in so many institutions in our society. We've seen this sort of just trending downward over the last several decades, maybe the last 30, even 40 years, where is it even possible for people to believe institutions like our major public health institutions, the CDCs, or in some cases our elected leaders, where we are hearing dissonant information from maybe the governor of Florida or Georgia relative to what we're hearing maybe from a governor in California or New York?
Yeah, and that goes to that triangulation that Doug was talking about earlier, where you may hear something that you either agree with or disagree with, and then you go look at 4 other sites that you trust to see, do I find more people supporting it or more people refuting it? And I think that the next section will get into more detail, but the bigger idea is think non-traditionally, right? So if people are not trusting the typical spokespeople on public health and government action, who do they trust? And is it those neighborhood, things like Nextdoor, which is really active? Their traffic is through the roof because people are saying, I heard this, but what are you seeing here in our neighborhood? I've seen really great work. I'm in Virginia. The Virginia Department of Public Health is very active in the local Nextdoor, saying, ask us questions if you need anything. They're really using those hyper-local channels really, really well. And then kind of go the other way and go pop culture. You know, I've seen everything from, you know, goofy things like Matthew McConaughey calling the bingo in a local nursing home. So they're all sort of locked down in the nursing home, but they have this interesting experience of having a famous star, you know, brightening their day and sort of making that isolation a little bit less isolated, to people actually going out with public health messages. We've got, if you haven't seen Arnold Schwarzenegger and his tiny horse in his kitchen, we have that on one of our slides where, you know, depending on who you trust, getting that wealth of voices out there is really what matters, because people there is somebody they trust. Let's try to find them and get them part of this group that we have, getting the right stuff out there.
Yeah, one last question, and then we'll move back because I know we want to get to Eric as well. Cindy asks, because you've done such a fabulous job putting together this deck, where are you getting the stock imagery of people in masks as a particular place to go? And this is a tactical question, but a lot of us are wondering this. Like, is this something you found on iStock or Shutterstock? Where did you go to get some of this stuff?
We have, as Doug mentioned, we have a really fantastic graphic team. This is our designer, Joe Grosskreutz, and I will ask him, and we will make sure that we share that with you all, where he got the images from. Yeah, because he pulled these just in the last day.
Oh, great. And Sarah McAfee, our colleague out in Denver, says that she's seen a lot of these. And so maybe, Sarah, you could put into the chat some of the resources you've seen and used. She's at the Center for Health Progress in Denver. Maybe you could share some of that. That would be helpful as well. All right, why don't we get back into it in the time we have remaining? And is it okay if we go, or you guys have a hard stop at 3, or can we go a little bit over into experts?
Yeah, we can go a little bit over.
Okay, great.
Yeah. And this is something I think we're all familiar with as well, right? And this is actually part of psychology and science as well. This is behavioral economists who said it is absolutely predictable that when lots of people come out and tell you how to behave, some people are going to feel that a threat to their liberty, and they're going to lash out and deliberately ignore it. And we're seeing this, right? If you can go to the next slide, this is something that was very prevalent all over the beaches of Florida a couple weeks ago. And some interviews with young people saying, you know, not my problem. I don't need to do this. I'm on spring break. I'm going to party. And some of them, to their, unfortunately, then were diagnosed with coronavirus afterwards. And, you know, as Doug said earlier, this is a chance where some of the reaction is to shame those people. You know, there's this Twitter handle going around calling them COVIDiots. That probably makes the people who are posting that on Twitter feel better. Whether or not it would actually affect behavior is probably a different question. But the idea being then, how do you reach them in a way that they are open to? And that is where understanding the audience and targeting and speaking their language and telling the kinds of stories that make sense for them. And so there's, you know, the thing that they are losing by staying home is obviously the chance to see their friends and go out and party. And so, you know, there's different ways you can get around that. If you can go to the next slide. This was a post we found from a young person talking about how great it was to stay home. You know, so yes, partying and being on the beach is great. It's also great to be home with your dog and your book in the sun. And so sort of those counter messages of it's not all bad to be home. And then there's some even more interesting things we found. If you can go to the next one. We didn't put this video because it's actually quite long, but if you need some fun, this was a drag queen directed specifically to party people and talking about having your party at home and doing, you know, making it more fun and doing the things you want to do at home. And she includes costume changes in that. So you should, we check that out afterwards. And then as promised, here is Arnold in his kitchen with his tiny horses, talking about stay home, listen to the experts. I believe he counts himself among that group. And then he has some other choice words for people who go out. So again, he's a, you know, worldwide movie star and former governor. He has a lot of credibility with a lot of people. Obviously, kind of a crazy informal focus. This is not Anthony Fauci in the White House briefing room, but it reaches different people with the same message. And again, that diversity of messaging. So consistency in content, but diversity in the art that you use to get it out there is really the key here to reach these sort of more intractable audiences. And then go to the next one. So yeah, this is a question we had, and I see some question, you know, what are people seeing and what do they, you know, wish they had better information or better ideas on how to counter?
Why don't we go? We have a couple more questions. Let's get to those. And of course, please do go ahead and add your questions in there. And also, if you want to tell us what you're doing, you can add that into the chat. But Shannon asks, are there any solutions forward resource recommendations? So like that you would recommend for deeply marginalized, disfranchised people who are disproportionately being impacted by this crisis? So in this case, she's saying Black and brown people, Native communities. What kinds of things can we be doing to make sure that at least a piece of that must be that the word is not getting out or that the message is not getting through? Any suggestions there?
Yeah, this is something we've been talking and thinking about a lot. I know, Doug, we just did some research on how to reach, how to better reach these kind of communities. And it's really hard right now for a whole host of reasons, including the fact that many of them are still working, and they're working, taking care of children, dealing with the stresses of trying to go to the grocery store and do those everyday activities that have gotten orders of magnitude harder for many of us. And I think that's, again, to me, where community partners, people in the neighborhoods, people who are helping deliver those services, can you work with those? Can you offer them help? What I've seen a lot of in particular is food banks and food pantries are incredibly overwhelmed right now. And is there a way to give information along with the food, along with the supplies, so that you're reaching people in that really, really important moment where they're getting help and they're more receptive to hearing more from them, more in that moment? I don't know, Doug or Eric, if you have other ideas that you have in your mind, particularly Eric, because you haven't had a chance to talk yet.
Yeah, no, I think that's, I think what you mentioned is right on. And also just, as we'll talk about in a moment, the importance of authentic messengers. People trust the messengers that they identify with and respect and empathize. And so having, messengers who are authentic to those communities, delivering information is just as important.
Nick asks or points out in the Q&A box, says, we're hearing a lot of people complaining about others and calling 911 to report larger public gatherings, people walking six abreast on the trails. What's the best way to approach these people, both the complainers and the violators? Any suggestions? You're walking down the block. I was walking the dog the other day. A couple people walking abreast, didn't really have enough room to get by, so I jumped into a neighbor's yard. She feels a little bit weird and not super neighborly, but I didn't want to scold them because I didn't think that would do much good.
Yeah, and I think that's the natural reaction, right? You idiot, you should get out of the way. Not particularly productive. There was I just saw something where a gentleman was assaulted some teenage girls. He was arrested for assault because he was, some teenagers were hanging out on a street corner. I think the more productive thing is again, to try to figure out where is that shared value? I know you guys really miss seeing each other. This is a tough time for everybody, but you really should go home now. Like to remind them of their that you understand the situation they're in. That you commiserate with them and share that, but right now everybody's kind of making sacrifices, and could they do that? I think a little bit of sort of charity and grace right now goes a lot farther than accusations and certainly assault. In the situation you're in, I think we're all in that incredibly weird, awkward place of, God, I'm so sorry I'm trampling these people's flowers, but I'm just trying to do my 6 feet, like sort of being a little bit more conversational, but reminding them of the right thing, which is I'm trying to stay 6 feet away from you and you guys are not 6 feet apart.
Yeah, and I know there's I think this started fairly recently. I don't know if anybody else is enjoying the Cuomo brothers bromance. It's been showing up online, but they've started a hashtag that says stay home 4. I think it's the number 4. And the governor and his brother were arguing which one of them got to claim their mom as the reason. That might be something that you can do, even just on Facebook page or Twitter, is just contribute to that as an individual, because almost certainly we have networks that we're talking to, and that's an action you can take and offer a clear reason why. So a good thing to do. Why don't we keep moving forward, just to be mindful of time, and we'll come to some of the other questions here in just a few minutes.
Yeah.
Sure, thanks. So the next lesson that we want to focus on here from the CDC manual is something that was mentioned earlier, which is the importance of emphasizing the positive. So as the quote says, crises do not only create negative emotions and behaviors, feelings of excitement, greater self-worth, strength and growth may come from the experience. You go to the next slide quickly, there's a few more lessons. They go on to note that crises can lead to a new sense of strength and empowerment, a renewed sense of community, and opportunities for growth and renewal. So the question is obviously, it's easy to say now that we'll come out of this stronger. But how do we say that without sounding trite? And how do we tap into that reservoir of positivity when most people are feeling the opposite for justifiable reasons? So we want to offer one framework and a few examples that we've used to kind of think through this in our own work. Next slide. Yeah, so we've developed this framework sort of for systematically thinking through the most inspiring and engaging aspects of any particular topic, which we call the aspirational communications model. It draws on several theories from both consumer marketing and motivational psychology, which basically say that to communicate with the most motivational power, you have to communicate with your audiences at multiple levels. So the most inspiring and engaging level is what we call the aspirational level, so appealing to people's hopes and values. These aspirations are our ideas for the kind of person that we want to be, the kind of life that we hopefully want to live, and they're really powerful drivers of our decisions and behaviors. So while health challenges and health crises often start by invoking anxiety or fear, there are often opportunities to call on people's aspirations. But as communicators, it's sort of our responsibility to give them the language and the ideas and the actions that give them that path to be their best selves. Because in times like this, it's often not evident. So we'll show some examples of how to do that in just a moment. The next, go back to the last slide there. Sure, so the next level there, and I know we're in a rush, so I'll try to be quick here, is the social level. So as Doug mentioned earlier, social proof is a powerful driver of decision-making, which basically means that we look to other people like us or people that we respect and admire for cues about how we're supposed to react. So really important that we put people in the picture who appeal to your audience. The emotional level, obviously any health challenge is fraught with emotion, and emotions are really powerful drivers of decision-making. We'd all like to think that we are rationally thinking through the pros and cons of everything that we do and making a careful decision. But the psychology says otherwise, that really emotions dictate to us what's important and what's not important. It forces us to prioritize actions in our mind. So to motivate people to focus on productive actions, we as communicators have to address those emotional dynamics. And in a time like this, it means reducing anxiety that can paralyze us and encouraging a sense of personal agency. And then finally, there's what we call the functional level, which is where we often spend most of our time, maybe too much of our time, which is actually explaining how things work, right? So at this level, we're giving people information and about what actions they should take and how that will affect their lives. And the key here, as Doug mentioned, is to keep things really super simple, right? So communications about actions need to be intuitive, which means that people just understand them instantly and without much mental energy. In a crisis, we're already pretty depleted emotionally. We don't have a lot of energy to think through really complex topics. So giving people information that they can process instantly, fluently, and without a lot of thought is the most important thing. But really, the takeaway from here is that while that orange functional level is important, you have to complement it with the emotional, social, and aspirational components for people to prioritize it in their lives. All right, next slide. So that's a lot of theory. We want to show you a few examples of how that can be put into practice. So we're going to talk about a few case studies that we've worked on. First, Kerry's going to talk about the Truth Campaign, and then I'll talk briefly about a campaign that we worked on with Planned Parenthood of New York City to reduce unintended pregnancy.
Yeah, and if you don't know the Truth Campaign, it was the first counter-marketing campaign. You can yeah, we'll just hold here. And really for many years, obviously, and often very effectively, people addressed youth smoking by talking about the health effects of tobacco. That worked until it didn't work anymore. And really people were sort of at their wits' end trying to figure out how did we reach young people when the rates of youth tobacco use were going through the roof. And the answer was to sort of pivot 180 degrees, and instead of saying, what do we public health people want to tell them, to figure out why they were doing it in the first place and tap into that aspiration, which for a teen or a young person is really that expressing individuality, taking control of their own lives and their own destiny, and in many ways standing up to authority. So when you had something like tobacco control, where every authoritative presence in their life, from their doctor to their mom to their teacher to the health class, were telling them don't do this, there were, as we talked about earlier, people who deliberately then to refute what they were being told. And so the Truth Campaign tapped into that. And it tapped into those feelings of rebellion and that desire to stand out and be your own person and set up your own identity by taking on the tobacco companies and by showing that most youth tobacco use was deliberately marketed to young people as that aspirational identity. It wasn't authentic. It was actually the construction of large corporations based in big buildings in major cities in the US. So this ad, if we have, it's about a minute. This was one of the first ads, and it was called Body Bags. It's a public health message that 1,300 people a year die from tobacco use, but executed in a way that really spoke to the motivations of the teenage audience.
Here for you so you can see what 1,200 people actually look like. Keep following them up, guys.
And you know, that was one of dozens of ads in that campaign, all of which shared that same sense and that feeling of really sort of uncovering what was really behind this behavior. If you can go to the next slide, this was my personal favorite. Many of us were familiar in the days when you could run huge billboards from tobacco companies. This was run from the Truth Campaign that was run as a billboard, showing what was really behind those beautiful models was actually far less beautiful tobacco executives, complete with their black socks on the beach. And again, the idea being, let's understand the audience, reach them in ways that make sense for them, and that tap into those authentic aspirations that they feel at this point in time to get the public health message across.
Okay, we've got some questions. Let's get after them. I know we're just at the top of the hour, but appreciate all of you who can stick around. If you have to jump, we are, as we always do, making this recording, which we'll post up on YouTube and the network website. Our good friend and colleague, Carrie Schum, is making live notes, and you can also check out notes that our colleague, Yabby Ferris, has been making on Twitter at the hashtag ComNetLive. My guess is she screenshotted a lot of these slides, so if that's helpful to you. And of course, Doug wrote all of this up, which you can find on comnetwork.org, or we sent it to you in an email a little bit earlier today. All right. First question comes from someone who didn't put in their name, and an anonymous attendee says, if you're not an organization on the front lines or an org in healthcare, do you see any negative effects to sharing actions to stop the spread? Doug or Kerry, or whoever wants to swing at that. Is there anything wrong with, say, the Rockefeller Foundation sharing messages from the CDC?
Sorry,
Doug, I think you're
on. Not at all. As I said at the beginning, all of you work with organizations that are trusted by people in your community and in your networks. And this is a time to lend your audience to the effort and share those messages.
All right, next question comes from our friend Sandra. She said, this should be a long campaign. Are there any tips already on how to keep the message fresh and relevant and consistent? Since we just don't know when the end date's going to be, and with so many states not taking actions in concert, that end date looks like it's going to be spread out a little bit further than we might all know.
Yeah, I can touch on that briefly. I think this relates a lot to what we were discussing with emphasizing the positive. So short-term campaigns are often very effective tapping into negative emotions that make people angry or sad or feel sympathy for people. And that's very good at generating short-term action, because that's an uncomfortable emotion that we want to get rid of. So we take one action to get rid of it so that we can go on with our lives and give ourselves permission to not feel that anymore. But it's really difficult to keep people engaged over the long term when the emotions that you're focusing on are ones that are frustration or sadness or things that make people feel unpleasant. So that really comes down to focusing on the positive and the aspirational, both how people's actions can help them live up to the image of who they want to be, or our hopes for the future that may result from the actions that we're taking. So that's one big picture insight when you're thinking about long-term engagement, that positive communications are easier to sustain.
Our friend Allison asks, if your organization doesn't really have anything to offer specifically related to this crisis beyond maybe resharing that good advice and CDC guidelines, to what extent should the organization keep sharing its own content, or should they just go more or less radio silent until there's more public capacity for consuming other news? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, we actually just did some research on this. And the interesting thing is, I wouldn't call it distraction, but there is only so much content about the pandemic that people can consume. And particularly for nonprofits, you do have people who care about your mission. That's how you've built your organization. And they are likely interested in hearing from you, both because they cared about you before. They may worry about what's happening to you and your organization in this crisis. Many people are struggling. And they also want to hear about the issue itself. As either a way to reestablish normality in their day-to-day life, or as a distraction from the news. So I would not hesitate to share. Be thoughtful about it. Don't just be sort of bragging or just getting PR out there. If there's a way to connect it, even better. But people are generally interested in a lot of the things they were interested in before, and it could be a nice respite for them and a way to keep them engaged with you when we do return to normality, which hopefully will happen at some point in the future.
Okay, Bill asks, I don't think we have enough influential voices or even regular people telling the public what we can do, the positive piece. When we're told what not to do, people sometimes struggle identifying alternatives. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think that goes to what Eric just said about what are the positive messages. There are a lot that we all can do, and the can do could be in the ways you support your family, in the ways that you support your community. Life goes on, and we are all struggling with lots and lots of things. And so those examples we shared about, supporting a local restaurant, whether it's with gift cards or with takeout or with supporting the servers, supporting small businesses. Again, it may be gift cards today, or it may be referring them to somebody else so that they can build a mail order business. But those kind of positive things are meaningful to people. They make people feel good. And they, as you're saying, those are positive emotions that do help people through this.
Okay, last question comes from our friend Heather, and she asks, we have a large population of unsheltered people, and our cities are following CDC guidelines to not clear encampments. But there are a lot of complainers out there about seeing an increase in tent campers, and I'm hearing hate speech. How do you suggest that we counteract that?
I'll start on that one. I think a lot of it goes back to some of the things we were saying before. In the realm of emphasizing the positive, meaning show the people who support the folks who are living on the street. Show the good examples, share the examples of people doing the right thing is always a good way to lean into these things, rather than the more attention you put on the negative people makes it look like that's what everybody's doing. So on one hand, that's a simple solutions-oriented proactive way to go about it. And in the same way, we're trying to do positive reinforcement, support good action, and sharing messages from people who represent your audience, speaking out against that sort of thing. It's fairly straightforward, but that's what I would do in this situation. Sean, I think too, Eric has one more example from a campaign that I think might be a very positive note to end on in terms of how to use aspirations. to drive positive action.
Oh, that'd be great. Eric, want to take it away?
Sure. Yep. If you go to the next slide here. Sure. So a few years ago, we partnered with Planned Parenthood of New York City on a campaign to reduce unintended pregnancy rate in the city, which at the time was as high as 6 out of 10 pregnancies being unintended, which is pretty shocking. Our experiences with the campaign offered a few just lessons on how to take an issue that's fraught with anxiety and stigma and sort of use aspirational communications to empower people to take action. So the target for this campaign was low-income young women, especially low-income young women of color. And what we knew about this audience is that there is financial insecurity, other stresses in their life that really threatened their sense of control. And so on the one hand, you might go into this thinking that simply scaring people about the consequences of an unintended pregnancy and how that would make matters worse would be one way to get them to take action. But that was actually really counterproductive for at least 2 reasons. First, that kind of messaging undermines people's sense of control and personal agency, which can really be demotivating. And 2, for many young women, having a child is an aspiration. Even having a child sooner than we may think is an aspiration. And so we don't want to demonize something that really has positive associations for the audience and for good reason. To go to the next slide. So guided by these insights and other research, the campaign adopted what we think of as a pretty empowering message. I'm on it. The message implies a sense of personal agency, and there's also an encouragement to use the type of long-acting birth control, being on a form of birth control that is long-acting, that's really most effective from a public health perspective. And throughout this process, we use focus groups with young women to inform the visual strategy of the campaign. So they identified photographs that really felt authentic to them. So this is one, and the next few slides, if you just want to go through quickly, have a few other examples of that. Go to the next one. Yep. And so, so the campaign was adopted by more than 88 organizations targeting different parts of the city, and with pretty remarkable success. So in 2016, unplanned pregnancies in New York City were down 57% from where they were about 10 years earlier. So this is just a relatively straightforward example, if you want to go to the next slide, of a few takeaways that we think are pretty consistent with the CDC's guidance that we've seen, which is feeling empowered encourages action more than scaring people or making them feel uncertain about what's going to happen. It's important when you're doing that you provide a sense of control over the actions that they can take, and how those actions will in turn make them feel like they have a better sense of control over their lives. And finally, give people a path and encourage them to be their best selves. Don't scare them about how they might lose control, but give them an image that they can live up to. So that's just a quick Cliff Notes version of that campaign. Happy to, of course, take any more questions here, both about this example or other forms of communication.
And Tristan, you can show this last slide there with our information that people can reach out to as well. We're happy to stay on and answer questions. If you have to go, feel free to send us an email at info@hattaway.com. If you want to wonk out further on communication science and aspirational communication that Eric was just talking about, we have a podcast called Achieve Great Things and a blog that you can access via our website at hattaway.com. But we're happy to take a few more questions if people have them now.
Yep. If you would, go ahead, everybody, and toss those into the Q&A box if you've got them. But it looks like most folks are now just about the top of the hour starting to see people sign off. So why don't I go ahead and take the privilege of just saying thank you on behalf of everybody. We had over 200 folks with us today. Grateful for all the work you've done. And this will be available for lots of other folks. If you found it valuable and you want to share it along, please do. We will be back tomorrow. Nat Kendall-Taylor from Frameworks will be with us to talk about framing for change in this moment, things that you can be doing now. And again, we're just hoping everybody is healthy, safe, and well. Stay home, do the positive things you can. And Jeffrey, thank you. Thanks to everybody for being with us, and most especially Kerry, Doug, and Eric. Just our huge thanks. The amount of work you put in over the last couple of days to help all of us get a little bit smarter and better is something I think we're all incredibly grateful for. Just an incredible kindness and generous thing for you to do. So with that, everybody be well. We will see you tomorrow, and we'll be sharing out notes in this video of this very, very soon. So thanks, everybody. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.